Welcome back. This is part 2 of deployment of a Laravel application. If you didn't catch the first part, I highly recommend you follow the steps in step 1 before moving on to step 2. We're going to get right to it. We did a big introduction in step 1, so we don't need to talk too much about what we're actually doing. Just to recap, in the previous episode, we set up our droplet, set up a firewall, set up OpenSSH, and Nginx. And this is the page that we got. So we are hosting this page inside our droplet. And you can see it here, right in the IP. We are able to fetch this Nginx default page. All right, so let's head back to the guide and keep going. Up next, MySQL. Of course, very important. Let's go ahead and copy that. All right, so I'll paste that in now, and let's install MySQL. It's going to ask you for the sudo password. Let me enter that now. Do you want to continue? Hit Y, enter, and it's going to install. And there we go. All right, let's head back to the guide. So up next, we're going to run this MySQL secure installation. This actually ships with MySQL, and the point of it is to ready MySQL for production environment. When it installs as a default, there's a lot of extra tables and a lot of open permissions to allow you to get into it as easily as possible. But for production, we really want to lock everything down, delete all the extra fluff, and just leave exactly what we need. And that is just what it does. So I'm going to copy that command, head back to the terminal, and run that now. So this is going to run through a series of questions. We'll walk through the questions and talk a little bit about each, and then I'll give you my recommendation on what to choose. So the first one is Validate Password plugin. So the Validate Password plugin, what it does is it tests passwords and sees if your MySQL password is secure enough. In our case, we're going to say no. We don't really want to have that, so I'm going to just hit no for now. Remember, our droplet is very secure to begin with because we disabled passwords to actually get into it. So there isn't a huge risk for somebody to actually break into the droplet itself. The risk would be more on MySQL injection and stuff like that. So we'll hit no on that. So the next one is we need to set a password for the root. So I will just type a very simple password for mine, but this is just for demonstrations. In a production environment, I highly recommend you make a very long, difficult password with special characters and numbers and digits, uppercase, lowercase, really mix it up. For mine, I'm just going to make it password, okay? Re-enter password. Next one is cleaning up any users that MySQL ships with that we don't really need. Do we want to remove those? Click Y for yes. And then it says, do you want to disallow root login remotely? Now this is a tricky one. I use Table Plus or SQL Pro to access my database from my local machine. If you turn this on, you will be able to do that. But if you disallow it, then you will not be able to do that. I like doing that and accessing my database, so I'm going to click no on that. Then the next thing is, do you want to remove the extra database that it ships with? We'll hit yes for that. Do you want to reload the privileges table now? And you can say yes for that. That way it applies all of the changes that we just made. And then that's it. We're all done getting MySQL ready for production. Let's go on to the next step. So in the guide, I do run you through each of these. You jump ahead and we are right here. So now we're going to enter the MySQL CLI. This is basically the command line tool for MySQL. And there we are. We are inside MySQL. Awesome. In this next step, what we want to make sure is that our root user actually is able to log in and use the database. So I'm going to copy the next command and let me paste that in. And so what we see here is that our root user has the plugin of auth socket as opposed to the native password. We need it to have a password. That way our Laravel application can actually connect through the root user. So let's change that now. To do that, we're going to alter the user root at localhost, and we're going to make sure that we set a password. So notice here it says strong password here. This is just a placeholder for what you actually want to put in there. So let me change that now, and we'll say that our password is just going to be Laravel. All right. And then finally, let's go ahead and make sure that the changes that we applied did in fact have an effect. And so we see that now. This is before and this is after. So we see that the root user has the MySQL native password. Great. All right, now let's flush the privileges. What this will do is actually apply the changes that we just made. And now we can just exit out of here. So now we can no longer do sudo MySQL. You can't do that anymore because you need to have a password. A password is required from here on out. So the way that you would enter into that CLI tool that we just used is you have to say MySQL -u. The U stands for your user. So my user is root and -p. Hit enter, and now it asks for our password. My password, I used Laravel, all lowercase, so Laravel. And there we are. We are back into MySQL. You can hit exit, and we're back to our shell. All right, let's keep going. Up next, we need to get PHP and get the basic Nginx configuration done. So first and foremost is we need to add a repository where we can find PHP. Let's add that now. And now, let's go ahead and install PHP. Do you want to hit continue? Hit Y. This might take a minute. We'll be right back. And there we are. So the next step actually gets us to create a site in our droplet for our domain. So let's create that now. I'll go ahead and paste that in and replace your.domain.com with what I know my domain is going to be. You may not have one, and that's perfectly fine. I'm going to show you how to set this up without even having a domain. But I know I'm going to have a subdomain in coderstape.com. So laravel.coderstape.com. That is my domain that I'm going to use for this project. So inside of here, we just need to paste everything that is inside this block. Now there is some placeholder text, such as the server name right here, and that's the only thing that we actually need to change. Let's paste that in and then go through it very quickly. So this is setting up a new server in Nginx. We're going to be listening in port 80. Remember, every HTTP request goes through port 80. Then the root of our files is going to be under var www.html. Remember, we haven't set up our Laravel project yet, so we are just relying on the Nginx configuration for this. So we are going to be looking for an index or an index.php file or an index.html. That's the order, and so on and so forth. So our server name, of course, will be our IP, since we don't have a domain just yet. So we'll replace that with our IP. I'll go ahead and paste it in. And then location, we're going to try files in the URI, or we're going to return a 404. If we are able to find the file, if it ends in .php, then we're going to go ahead and use the fast CGI PHP config file and run the files through the PHP parser before returning it to the user. If the files instead start with .ht, as in htaccess, we're going to go ahead and deny all. htaccess is not Nginx. htaccess is Apache, and that's a totally different thing. So Nginx is going to ignore any requests for an htaccess file. Awesome. So the only thing you have to change is just your IP up here, not mine. All right, let's hit save on that. Remember, that's :WQ, enter, and that will get you out of Vim and save the file. So the next step is we have to get that file that we just created and create a symlink from sites available, which is where our file is, to sites enabled. And this is the way that Nginx will know what sites are available. So let me copy that code. We're going to have to modify it, but we'll paste it in. Everything remains the same, but of course, yourdomain.com is just placeholder, like I said before. So here we need to type in laravel.coderstape.com. That's what I'm using. You would type in your own domain. Again, you don't need a domain for this. This is just what we're really calling this file. Just use a URL that eventually maybe will be the domain for this project. We'll hit enter on that, and then I'm going to unlink this default. So this page that we've been seeing here is the default. I want to go ahead and disable that default. Okay, copy that. I'm going to hit paste. And now I've included this command here. This command, sudo nginx-t, will test the entire configuration of Nginx. If you get an OK, that means that you made no mistakes and everything should work according to plan. So let's try that now. Hit paste, and we get syntax is OK, and the test is successful. So we are good to go. Nginx was not able to detect any problems with configuration. Great. Let's keep going. So now we're going to reload Nginx. That way we can apply all changes. and that's restarting. So now I'm going to create just a simple info.php file that we can access and make sure that PHP is actually being parsed. So let's do that now. Inside of here, this is going to be a very simple PHP file, and all it's going to do is just PHP info, and that's it, nothing else. We just want to be able to see the PHP configuration file when we visit our droplet/info.php. So now we can switch over and hit info.php, and with any luck, you see your PHP configuration file. Awesome. If you see this page, you are good to go. We are running PHP, Nginx is finding it, and we're able to parse PHP pages. Great. The next step is optional, but I will run it. What it does is removes the file that we just created. We really don't need it. We just wanted to confirm that everything was good to go with PHP. So let me run that now and get rid of that file. Great. Now let's dial in the Laravel ecosystem. So the basic setup of the server is done. It's time for us to focus on Laravel and Laravel specific configurations that we need to do. The first one is that there are a couple of PHP extensions that Laravel requires that we did not install. One of them is MBString and the other one is XML. We also need Composer and we need Unzip. None of these were installed just yet, so let's go ahead and complete that. Hit paste. Hit enter. It's going to ask you if you want to continue. Hit Y for yes, and this might take a minute. We'll be right back. All right, that's all done. So the next thing I need to do is I need to create a database for our Laravel project. So let me log into MySQL, and remember the command is MySQL-u for user root, which is our user -p, and that's going to ask for our password. My password was Laravel. And there we are. We are inside MySQL. So now let's create a new database called Laravel with a default character set of UTF-8 and Unicode CI. Perfect. Hit paste, hit enter. If you wanted a different database name, just change Laravel to whatever you want it to be. So now we're going to grant complete access of that database to our user. So let's do that now. I'm going to hit paste. So my user is not Laravel user. My user, remember, is root. So I'll change that to root. And we are identified by my password, which is Laravel. We are good to go on that. I will go ahead and flush all privileges and exit out. All right, fair enough. We are good to go on the MySQL side. So the next thing I want to do is I want to bring in my project. I actually have my project up on GitHub, so we're just going to drag that in and drop it in so that we can see something on the page. Now remember, our files are in var www.html because that's what we set inside our Nginx configuration. So we need to follow that convention. So let's head to that directory now, and then let's make a new directory, and I'm going to call it first project. All right, let's head into that directory, and let's make a new directory called first project. Up next, we need to change the owner of that project to the Laravel user. This Laravel, this is the user that you created in part 1. I used the name Laravel. If you used a different name, you would have to change that name right now. Remember, this is the user that we created in part 1 for our droplet. Perfect. I'll hit paste. And now let's go ahead and clone that repository into that first project. Let's cd into first project and clone down that repository. Boom. Perfect. Of course, we need to do composer install, and then we need to set up our environment file. All right, let's do that now. Composer install. We'll give that a second to finish up. All right, that's all done. So now we have that .env.example, but we actually need to have that copied over to a .env file. Remember, the .env file is what holds all of the different configurations for each of your servers. When you're in local environment, you're going to have certain variables in there, and then when you're in production, you're going to have different ones. So we're going to copy the example file to just a .env file. And then let's vim into that .env file, and there we are. There's a couple of things that we need to change here. And the first one is this app environment. Of course, we are no longer in local. We are now in production. Let's set that to production. And we don't want debug. If you leave that to true, then whenever you get an error, Laravel is just going to spit out a bunch of information, making your project at risk. So let's definitely set that to false unless you are in a local environment. So set that to false, and that's it for now. Now this app key, to set that up, we can run a PHP Artisan command. So I'm going to exit out of this file, that's :wq enter, and we can run PHP Artisan the same way that we did in our local environment. Now there is this key generate right here, and the reason why we haven't used that is because when you install Laravel with the Laravel installer, it does it for you. So we didn't have to manually do it. Now when you install everything from scratch, you have to do everything from scratch. So let's run PHP Artisan key generate, and that generates a key for us. If we vim back into that env file, now our app key is set. Great. All right, let's exit out and let's go on to the next step. So I did put part of the file here. So the next thing we need to do is we do need to set up the database for our project. So let me actually go back into that same file, and here's the database section down here. All right, let's set this up. So my database that I created was called Laravel. My username is root, and my password is Laravel. All right, so my database is set up. So if we did everything correct, we should be able to migrate our database now. Let's see what happens. It's going to say, your application is in production. Are you sure you want to run this command? Yes, I do. And there we are. We migrated our database. So we have successfully connected to MySQL, installed, set up that user, and migrated our database. Great. Let's keep going. So as a next step, I do put that key generate. We already ran that step, so don't worry about it. Now these next 4 lines are required because of a permission issue. You got to understand that when you are running Laravel through the browser, the user that is acting as PHP is a user called www-data. Right now, we are under the Laravel user. So everything that we add is actually owned by that Laravel user. But we have to give up those rights and say, go ahead and give all permissions to these directories to the appropriate user. And the appropriate user in this case is that www-data user. So we just need to run all 4 of these commands and we should be good to go. All right, so let's do that now. Paste. It's going to ask for your sudo password. Perfect. Let's keep going. Second one, just copy and paste. And then the next one, copy. Now this one, you may have to modify. I named the directory first-project. If you named it something else, make sure that you change that now. Same thing for this 4th command. It says first project right here. If you use a different name, make sure you change that. Perfect. So we are good to go. Now we need to modify Nginx. Remember, when we set up our initial project, we were just looking to get into our project, but we did not specify the Laravel first project. And all Laravel projects actually have a public directory, and that's the directory that you actually access through the browser. So we have to change that now. You can either copy paste this in, or you can just simply change that if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and copy this entire thing and change that inside our sites available. All right, so let's sudo vim etc. Nginx sites available. And then remember, my site was called laravel.coderstape.com. In this one, you would use whatever you were using. All right, so let's actually erase everything. And I'm going to paste that new snippet back in. Let me just modify the server name, which is the only thing that we have here. Obviously, yourdomain.com is not correct. You need to put the IP for your droplet. I'll paste that in, and we are good to go. This file looks identical to before, with the difference is that now we are targeting the same directory structure, but then we're going into first project and then into public. This is a Laravel specific thing that you need to know. So every project, again, has a public directory, and that's the directory that we actually point the browser to. So we'll add that, and let's exit. That's :wq, and let's move on. So we're going to run that test one more time. So that's sudo nginx -t for test. And if you get an OK and successful, then you did everything right. So now we just need to restart Nginx at this point. And if we did everything right, we can actually visit our server and we should get our sample project. So we refreshed and we get this HTTP error 500. Very cryptic, not really sure what's going on, but what I bet it is a permission issue. This is something that a lot of new users run into when they're installing Laravel from scratch, and that is these steps that I put up here. Yes, we ran through everything, but sometimes you need to do it again. So let me just run all 4 of them again, and let's see if we can get this resolved. I'll paste that one, and then the second one, then the third, and then the fourth one more time. It just looks like I need to add sudo in front of that last command. And now we're good to go. So with any luck, let's refresh again. Perfect. So we see our Laravel project. So if you run into a little bit of a hiccup like that, where you get that HTTP 500, go ahead and run those commands again. And 9 out of 10 times, these 4 commands will fix whatever it is that's wrong with it. So we are good to go. So this is actually the app that we've been developing and playing with since the very beginning of this course. So it's nice to be able to see it in a production server as opposed to just being in our local development. So that's great. So the last couple of steps is let's encrypt, which will give us an SSL certificate. And there's some extra credit stuff here that I added, which basically just makes the prompt pretty. Now this lesson is getting kind of long, so I'll split that off into part 3. So stick around, we got some more work to do. I'll see you in part 3.